Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nerdy Watch List podcast. My name is Mason, and today we are going to be reviewing / breaking down Captain America: The First Avenger. This movie chronologically sets up the MCU. Technically, Iron Man came out first, but this movie chronologically is the beginning of where we would start. So here we are. We're gonna watch the movies chronologically, and go from there. This movie, we're gonna go ahead and start. This movie kind of starts with some scientists going into the Arctic, and they discover a shield frozen inside of. Really, they go and they find this plane that's kind of crashed into ice, and then they go into this. They cut through the ice with a laser, which the laser is pretty dang cool. But then they find this shield frozen in the ice, which is kind of foreshadowing the fate of Captain America in the future. Really by the end of this movie. But yeah, the opening scene is these researchers finding Cap and his shield, and that's kind of where the first scene ends. Then we get to see Johann Schmidt. Johann Schmidt is the Red Skull. If you do not know who Red Skull is, we will pretty much explain him throughout this podcast. So yeah, but in comes Johann Schmidt. He is this scene takes place in Norway. They are looking for the Tesseract. If you do not know what the Tesseract is a Infinity Stone, which will come important in the MCU much later. Much later in the MCU, Infinity Stones become a topic, but they kind of build this up through multiple movies, the Infinity Stones. But that is connected to Thor. That stone, that the Tesseract is normally based in it's the Norse. So it's like Thor and Loki in them, and which we will see that in the Thor movie. But pretty much, Johann Schmidt plows through a wall and he crushes a guy. Johann Schmidt is a bad guy, by the way. Also, I love the car he is driving in this scene because it's such a nice car. But yeah, he's pretty much there for the Tesseract, and he gets his hands on it. And the Tesseract is a really strong stone, and it can cause a lot of issues, by the way, which it eventually does. Then we go back to before Steve Rogers is frozen in ice. This is before Steve Rogers has the super soldier serum or anything. He is so short in the beginning of this movie and thin. Like, he has no strength whatsoever. But in this scene, he's trying to sign up to go to war, and they won't let him because of his asthma. He has used the same name, but he used many different locations trying to sign up, which is kind of not good. I don't know if that's legal necessarily, but Steve ends up getting in a fight with this guy and uses a trash can lid as a shield, foreshadowing him using a shield in the future. They make a few of these references throughout the movie. Then Bucky comes in and helps, because Steve pretty much gets his butt kicked. Bucky comes in to help. This is pre-Winter Soldier, so he doesn't have the robot arm, nothing. He isn't even a super soldier, so yeah. Bucky tells Steve that he is going to war, which is Sad because Steve is not going to war. Steve was told he couldn't go to war, but Bucky's going. They then go to a expo, and by the way, the year is 1943. Tony Stark's dad is at this expo, Howard Stark, and he is showing off a hover car, which fails, by the way. Also, I love seeing Bucky throughout this movie because he's happier. And this is pre-Winter Soldier, so like he doesn't have like all the trauma he's been put through and all that. So yeah, it's nice seeing Bucky now because he just seems so friendly and so happy. Steve ends up going back to another recruitment building and trying again, which leads us kind of into the next scene. Steve goes in to get an exam for the recruitment people, and Dr. Erskine, whatever his name is, shows up. He's kind of the person who gets him put through the super soldier stuff. But he knows Steve has used many different names to try, many different places to try to get recruited. Steve kind of says he doesn't like bullies. It doesn't matter where they're from, Nazis or not. It doesn't matter. Just like if they're bad, they're bad, And then Dr. Erskine ends up accepting him to be recruited. We then see Zola, which, if you don't know who Zola is kind of a scientist who works for Hydra. But we see Zola and Red Skull talking, and they use the Tesseract. They kind of use it as a power source, and they're kind of using it for energy to use for weapons and making energy weapons and to power stuff. We then see Steve go in to train for the army. We then meet Peggy Carter also. Peggy is kind of like Captain America's, significant other, the person that he loves, But Peggy is talking to, this is before that, Peggy is talking to the group of soon-to-be soldiers and ends up punching a guy in the face for pretty much being a jerk. The general ends up talking to the group, and he sees Steve and hesitates while he's talking because he's so tiny. Steve goes through the training and is awful at all of it, but whoever passes the test will pretty much become the test for the super soldier. They then get put through the flagpole test, which is whoever can get the flag off of the top of the flagpole gets to ride in the back with Miss Carter. All the other soldier guys try to climb it, and they fail pretty much. And then Steve thinks outside of the box, and he knocks the pole down and grabs the flag, which is smart, really. It's so smart. And then he gets to end up riding in the back with Peggy. The captain ends up having doubts about Steve, so he does another test where he throws a dud grenade at the ground, and Steve pretty much jumps on it to shield everyone from being blown up, which shows honor and strength, and that he will do whatever it takes. Then it shows Erskine and Steve, where they talk about Schmidt becoming Red Skull and how it happened, and they pretty much say that he took the serum and it had negative side effects, plus he really was a power-hungry guy, and yeah. Then the next scene shows Steve and Peggy in a car together, and you slowly see these two kind of grow a bond over this movie and become close. He says women aren't exactly lining up to dance with someone that they will step on, which kind of makes sense because he's so tiny. And that he's waiting for the right partner, which is kind of hinting at Peggy. They end up going into an antique store, which is kind of a cover for a secret lab, where in this scene they turn Steve into Like, they gave him the super soldier serum, and pretty much he lays on a table, and Howard Stark shows up to run the stuff. And then they inject Steve with the serum, and then the chamber opens up, and it reveals a tall, like, buff Steve Rogers rather than the skinny toothpick that he was. Little guy. And then a Hydra guy kind of blows up a bomb inside the place, which sends everyone into panic. He also shoots Erskine, and Erskine dies. Steve then goes after the guy, and in this scene you see him run really fast, and he can jump higher. He's doing all this, and it shows like the changes that the super soldier did to him. He jumps onto the top of the taxi that the Hydra guy is driving, that he stole, and the Hydra guy starts shooting at the ceiling, and Steve's just dodging bullets, and it's a pretty cool scene to watch. Then the taxi ends up rolling, and Steve goes flying. In this scene, you also see Steve use a car door as a shield to stop bullets, which is another shield foreshadowing scene, showing that Steve will end up with the shield. Steve goes to stop the guy, and the guy ends up biting a capsule and foaming out the mouth and dying. Then the rest of the group says that they're going to go after Schmidt, and Steve kind of gets denied to go since he's the only super soldier, and the captain was kind of expecting an army of super soldiers, not just him, but the rest of the capsules got destroyed, so yeah, that's not happening. But then Steve gets pretty much put through having to put on a show on a stage for people, kind of being like the propaganda for the war, trying to get people to go to war, He's the Star-Spangled Man with a plan, They also made some movies with him and comic books, and he kind of becomes the icon for war, pretty much. Peggy shows up to, then he puts on a show for the army, and that doesn't really go well. They are not into it. Peggy ends up showing up, and, that show didn't go well, so, yeah. But Peggy says that the 107th group, which is, like, Bucky's group in the army, was sent out, and they never returned. And Steve wants to go after them, and the captain really just gives him a rough time about being the only super soldier rather than there being a super soldier army. Steve ends up going on a rescue mission without the captain's permission. He goes to save the 107th. This is kind of the first real mission as Captain America, and you see him jump out of the plane. The 107th group is called the Howling Commandos. You see Steve take down a bunch of guys, and he kind of goes and saves the Howling Commandos. Here you also see Bucky, and Steve saves Bucky, and they kind of take down the Hydra bases. And then there goes they return them back to camp, and then they go on, a montage of them kind of, taking down camps and all this stuff. And then they go on to this mission that involves a train. Also, before the train, Steve does get the vibranium shield from Howard Stark. He also ends up kissing a woman, and Peggy gets jealous, and to test the shield, Peggy shoots at Steve and hits the shield, and it shows that the shield is pretty much invincible, and also shows that Peggy is pretty goddamn mad at Steve. Then they show the train scene, and I like this scene because you get to see the people working as a team. I love the last few scenes with the montage of them taking down Hydra camps and stuff, because you get to see him on a motorcycle, which is cool, and I just love the scene because I just like seeing this group, because you really only see this group in this movie, so it's nice to see them in action. During this scene, some stuff ends up going wrong, and Bucky gets knocked out the train, and Steve tries to save him. Bucky falls off the train, which is really, really, really high up. He kind of falls, and you never see him again for the rest of the movie. Kind of hinting that Bucky, we think, is dead. Steve thinks he's dead, and we're never to see him again in this movie. Which is a really sad scene, because that is Steve Rogers' best friend. The only friend he really had, so it's kind of rough to see him go through that loss. This also kind of foreshadows him becoming the Winter Soldier in the future, which we will talk about whenever we get to the Winter Soldier movie, because you really don't find anything else out until then. So about Bucky, so yeah, we'll just put that conversation off until that movie. Also, going back to the montage of the Howling Commandos and stuff, you kind of see Steve get to be a leader, and you see him being the Captain America symbol. He actually gets to go through war and do this stuff, go on missions, and as Captain America, using the shield, being that icon for that stuff, and which is why, in the future, that's why he has a museum and stuff, because of all the things that he did. They finally go after Red Skull, and they infiltrate a Hydra base because Red Skull's kind of planning to bomb major cities around the world, which is not good because of obvious reasons. And he ends up blowing up the entire base. Throughout this scene, you see a lot of action, and it's pretty cool because you see a lot of explosions, and then you see Red Skull pull off his face and reveals the Red Skull and its grossness. Then he gets on a plane, and they have to chase after the plane and Red Skull's car, and then Steve finally gets onto the plane, and here is the plane battle. Steve fights with Red Skull, and Red Skull tries to use the Tesseract. During all this, Steve also has to fight people trying to blow up the cities. The bombs are in like plane things, and Steve ends up flying one because a guy goes out and he takes one, and he takes out the guy in the plane and then flies it back into the big plane, and kind of confusing, but it's a pretty cool scene. I don't know how he doesn't blow up the plane with the bomb, but it's pretty cool. Then Red Skull tries to use the Tesseract, and he finds out that the Tesseract is the space stone, and he kind of gets sent through space, and you never see Red Skull again. You see the Tesseract drop to the floor. It kind of melts through all the metal and falls into the Arctic Ocean. And then you see the plane is kind of falling out of the sky. The plane is also filled with bombs. And Steve has to make a decision on what to do. Steve ends up saving the world, but it's really sad because we also see him have to make the sacrifice of crashing into the Arctic Ocean. that's how Captain America got put through ice for like 70 years. And it's kind of really heartbreaking because Peggy and Steve have a conversation about her saving a dance for him whenever he gets back, and that he shouldn't be late. Which is sad because he doesn't get to have that dance with Peggy. Then Steve wakes up in present day New York, and it kind of messes with him because they make him think that he's still back in the time that he's from, but he is not. And he realizes that he's not because he went to the game that was playing on the radio, which they kind of messed up on. And then he meets Nick Fury, and Nick Fury tells him about everything that happens. You can kind of see Steve look around because Steve runs out of the building and runs out into the streets of New York, and you can see how different New York is. All the technology differences with cars and everything looks different. There's no more war. He finds out that they won the war, and he's just confused and doesn't know how to feel about all that stuff. This kind of sets him up for the Avengers, the first Avengers movie. Which we will talk about once we get there. We have to get through a bunch of other movies first. I don't know. That's kind of how the movie ends. This is one of my favorite Marvel movies because I love just the origin story of Captain America, and I love him being frozen in ice for so long and then coming into present day not knowing what to do or how to feel about anything. And you get to see how he, through the next few movies, you get to see how he adjusts to the world being different. And it's really nice because they can make a bunch of jokes about him not being from present day. I don't know. This is one of my favorite movies. I would give this movie a solid 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. I think 8 out of 10. Most of the original MCU movies are pretty good. Actually, I love all the movies, personally. Even, I've seen the Marvels. I love that movie. I loved Ant-Man Quantumania. I loved all of it. Even the movies that people really hate on, I've enjoyed. I like having a good time during the movies, so I try not to let things disappoint me as long as I'm laughing, having a good time. Plus it's a Marvel movie. Have a little fun. I love these movies. This is one of my favorite ones. I like seeing the Cap and Bucky friendship. I love seeing Bucky happy, which is rare in any MCU movie apart from this one. You get to see him a little happy in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but he's kind of like a grumpy old man most of the time, so, which kind of makes sense because he was also, frozen for God knows how long. I don't know if he was necessarily frozen, but he was, I guess he would be frozen by the Hydra, but I guess that was Captain America, the first Avenger, guys. I don't know, a lot happens. I like seeing Peggy and Steve's relationship as well. I also love that we get to see versions of Agent Carter, being the Captain America, and What If, and we see it in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness as well. Which we will talk about whenever we get there, But this kind of sets up future MCU movies, even though this really did come after Iron Man 1, but chronologically, this is the first movie in the timeline, so we will be watching these movies chronologically. I think the next movie is Iron Man, or it may be Captain Marvel chronologically. I don't know. We'll figure it out. yeah, the next movie is Captain Marvel, and then we have. I don't know what show we're gonna watch next. I'll figure that out over the weekend. But I'd like to thank you all for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast episode. The podcast is now on Amazon Music, and it will soon be on Apple Podcasts. It is on Spotify. It is on YouTube. I'll see what other podcast services I can get it on, but I'm gonna try to get it on as many things as possible. But I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you have any comments or questions about anything we've talked about, or just anything at all, put them in the comment section below, and we may talk about them in the next episodes. But I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I will catch you all in the next episode. Bye.